All right. Welcome, everyone. Good day to you all, and thank you very much for joining WBCSD's session at World Water Week, entitled Which Tool to Use, When and How for Businesses on Their Water Journey, introducing the Freshwater Accountability Navigator, or what we call FAN for short. My name is Una Harsinovic, and I lead our work on water stewardship here at WBCSD. And before I begin, I want to congratulate you all for making it to the last day of the conference. And for those of you that went to Josh's party last night, I'm very grateful you got up early this morning to be here. And for those that have tickets to the conference but are in bed listening to it in the comfort of their own hotel room, good call, good call. And very welcome to all our online audiences from around the world. So I'm relatively new to WBCSD, and I started earlier this year. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for the whole community. You've been very warm and welcoming and offering introductory sessions and bilaterals, and I really appreciate that. And sorry if I've not taken you up yet on your offer, but I've been very busy integrating into the organization and learning the ropes. And secondly, I also wanted to take this opportunity to recognize all your efforts, regardless of what industry you're in, what role you're in, how senior or junior you may be. I see more than ever just how challenging the water stewardship space is, and I see how hard you all are working, and I just wanted to say thank you from me to you. I see you, I value everything you do for me and the greater good. All right, let's get into it. So I'd like to introduce our panel for today that is helping me to deliver this session. So I'm kindly joined by Sarah and Lucy, both from Quantis, which is an international sustainability consultancy with specialist and technical expertise in water space. And we're also joined by Kirsten James from Ceres, Neha Astana from Inter IKEA Group, and Martin Carlson from Tetra Pak. And also a special thanks to Ariane, who's also from Quantis and is supporting our online audience with questions and comments. So the agenda for today is such that I'll do a really quick introduction to WBCSD, and then Quantis and I will discuss why the FAN was created in the first place. Then I'll hand over to Sarah and Lucy to present really what's inside the guidance, how to use it, and then I'll call up Neha, Martin, and Kirsten to have a panel discussion, and then we've left a good 30 minutes for your questions from the online audience and from you in the auditorium. And for the online audience, if you'd like to interact with the questions, you need to insert in the chat that you want to join the chat function and start the chat in order to be able to ask your questions. And our goal for today is for you all to leave here being a fan of the FAN. Sorry, I had to. All right, now turning to a quick introduction to WBCSD, which stands for the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We are a global community. We are a global community of leading businesses driving systems and transformation for a better world in which 9 billion people can live within the planetary boundaries. We have over 200 members, and we work together with our community of business leaders to really empower them to raise ambition for a better world, deliver action at speed and scale in their operations and value chains, and sharpen the accountability of their performance. The result in the end, what we want, is to limit the impact on climate crisis, restore nature, and tackle inequality, and these form our 3 building blocks. So within our nature building block, we have 3 work streams: nature positive, nature-based solutions, and water stewardship. And I need to do a small plug here for the nature positive roadmaps. So we're working with the Business for Nature and the World Economic Forum to develop sector-specific guidance to support companies in really understanding their nature-related dependencies, impacts, risks, and opportunities, in order to then prioritize action and advance progress across their maturity levels. The first 3 roadmaps, which are sector-specific to agri, food and forest, built environment and energy, are being launched during the week of the 11th of September. And as you see here within WBCSD, water stewardship really sits within nature because we recognize that water is an integral part of any nature project. And without taking action on water, we cannot deliver on our nature positive roadmaps. So everything we do within the water stewardship space, including this Freshwater Accountability Navigator, including the wastewater impact assessment tool that I presented on Monday, this will all feed into the nature positive roadmaps. So one question that came up and one need identified within the water space was there was currently nothing out there that shows when and how to use water-related tools and frameworks. And that's why we developed the Freshwater Accountability Navigator. In short, it's a streamlined guidance helping companies to navigate existing water-related frameworks and tools. We very much recognize with the release of SBT and for Nature, TNFD, both of which include water in their scope, there was really a need to help companies navigate through this emerging accountability system for water. And I really want to stress here today, we are not creating anything new. We're simply collating all the information that's out there and giving a very high-level overview of existing frameworks and toolkits. So essentially, we're creating visibility and driving traffic to these tools. The fan will be available by the end of 2023, so we don't have a demo to show you here today. And I'll hand over to Lucy now, who'll expand on the business case of creating the fan.
Thank you, Ina. Good morning, everyone. So yes, first things first, we thought it would be good before we actually show you what the fan contains. It would be good to look at the reasons that led us to believe that there was really a business case for it today. So you're not without knowing that there's a lot of diverse tools and framework out there for companies who want to start their water journey. And it's sometimes difficult to pick or choose or know which one they have to use and which one to start with. So that's the first reason for this work. Then there's rising stakeholder expectations for sure, whether it be from civil society, customers, governments, name it and it's going to be there. And obviously there's also different upcoming regulatory frameworks such as CSRD, for example, or others. So these are, again, all reasons why we realize there's probably a need to have some guidance on that. In addition to this, there's a need for clarity on different steps that companies can take if they want to tackle the water journey. Again, here the idea is really to provide simplicity and guidance to lower this barrier of entry. I think we heard that a lot this week. There's the barrier of entry to the water world can be actually quite high because it's scary. So this need of clarity is really existing. And in the middle of that, there's also a need for easy access to resources because today they exist, they're hosted in different form, in different places, and it's not always easy to navigate. So the idea is that we reconcile them at the same place and in an easy way. So what's the solution to this? We really wanted to come up with a harmonized user guidance, basically, for companies who want to look at accounting, target setting, disclosure, and any other step. And we'll talk about the steps in a minute in the water journey, together with actually clarification on data requirements, because we know data can be challenging, and there's sometimes they could be, again, talking about the barrier to entry, there could be a fear that data that companies have is not enough or that is not complete. And the message we really want to show also with this fan is that there's no need for perfect data. You can actually tackle a few steps already without having perfect data. So again, we're going to speak about that a bit later. But so this clarification of data that you need is something that we wanted to bring up here. And again, matching with the need of easy access, we really wanted to make sure that there's an easy navigation across key resources gathered at the same place. So I think that's in a nutshell what led us to actually do this work together with WBCSD. And now I'll go back to Una to present us what the process we undertook to get there.
Thanks, Lucy. So our approach to creating the fan, we first commissioned Quantis and their technical experts project that spans over 20 plus years, I believe, in water stewardship to really deliver on the written content within the FAN. And we did a call out in early March for our members who'd like to contribute to this work. And there was a large number of interest. And here you see 8 member companies listed here that then ended up forming the working group. And you'll hear from some of them shortly. So in parallel, we also had a call out to our partners, which then we created an advisory group listed here on the right. We really saw the need and importance to get their opinions and thoughts, so we're not duplicating other people's work out there, and we're really complementing each other's work and efforts. So again, I'd like to take this opportunity to once again extend my gratitude to those individuals who gave up their time to work on this vital tool, because we believe we've created something very, very useful here. So in the early part of this year, we started to define the scope and structure, and that was reviewed by the members and advisory group. And from April to May, Quantis ran interactive workshops with our members to really refine the content, understand what's the user and business needs, what's the most useful information to include, and how would this navigation tree, which you'll hear about later, work. And then we had 2 rounds of reviews of the draft guidance from members in working group over the summer, and currently we're reviewing the feedback and comments. So the next phase from September to December will be turning this into much more an interactive web-based tool for everyone to use, and then rolling out some training to complement that. And then phase 2 of the project is really making sure that the content is up to date with any new releases, but also with any new versionings within these tools and framework. So it really does need to be a living document. And here we really look to the owners of the content to help us with that, since it's only really updating a page or so. And since FAN is free and publicly available, we are really driving traffic to their frameworks and toolkits, so it also serves in their best interest. And now I'll hand over to Lucy and Sarah to show you a closer look inside the Navigator.
Good morning. I should stay here.
Yeah.
There's a mic. Yes, good morning, good afternoon for those who are joining online as well. Thank you for being here. So these are the types of questions that we tend to get from companies. What is my company's maturity level on water? And based on that maturity level, which tools and frameworks should I apply? And finally, how can I make sure that water is a priority on the corporate agenda of my company? What's the business case for this? So I can imagine that many of you have asked yourself these questions already. Well, the good news is you have been heard, and today we have some answers. Just trying to, voila, here we go. So here's the answer. This is a little bit what the FAN will look like. So as Una said, it's not going to be launched until the end of the year, and I can assure you it's not going to be a book. That was just a very nice piece of work from our designer. It will be an online interactive tool, because we know that companies using this type of guidance don't have much time, need to be directed to the right resources in little time. So there are 3 components to the FAN. One will have some harmonized user guidance, which will provide an overview of the key water-related frameworks and tools that exist. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what those are and how we selected them. But for each of these, we'll tell you more around what the tool is about, how to use it, when to use it, what are some of the data requirements that you can expect to have when needing to use this tool, what are the expected outputs, and then also associated resources such as user guidance, case studies, etc., for these different frameworks and tools. Second, there will be a navigation tree, and this will actually be the entry point to the FAN. So this will allow companies to assess their maturity level on water, and based on that, they will then be directed to the appropriate sections within the FAN, and there will also be some information on what would be required to move up to the next level of maturity. And my colleague Lucy will give you a snapshot later in terms of what this navigation tree will look like. The last section will be a business case. So here we've picked up on the sort of some latest research on the business case for water according to different sectors, etc. Kirsten will give you a little bit more information on that as well later in terms of what the research has been finding in terms of water-related challenges, but also impacts across different sectors. But then also key resources to help companies build the business case internally, because we know it's a challenge. I think there are many of you in the room and online today who would like for the company to take more action, but it's a question of resources, it's a question of convincing the right people, etc. So then you're going to ask yourself, how did we map these tools and which tools are in there? I'll get there, bear with me. So first things first, Una mentioned this already. This work is part of WBCSD's broader nature agenda. And conceptually, for us, it was really important to sort of structure this fan around this nature agenda. On the one hand, to show that water is part of this nature agenda, and two, to actually emphasize and elevate water to this nature agenda to show how essential water is to delivering on the nature agenda. And so to do that, we've chosen the ACT-D framework, which has been developed by the organizations that you see displayed on the slide below here. And it's basically a framework that has its goal to communicate on how companies can contribute to halting and reversing nature loss. So there are 4 steps. I'll briefly walk you through them. You see it's a wheel, so it's iterative, just as a disclaimer. But the first step would be assessing, where are my company's water-related impacts and dependencies? Where are the hotspots? And then in a second step, commit. We would set targets for those hotspots. Because, of course, we want to make sure that on water, we act in those locations where it matters the most and where it's most needed. A third step would then be transform. That's, of course, then the very obvious aspect of taking action. So restoring local ecosystems, contributing to healthy healthy basins, etc. And then all around you see disclose. So this is around communicating to external stakeholders what actions the company is taking on water. And the reasons also why I said it's iterative, because of course we all know that, I mean, for one, the world is evolving, climate change is having important impacts on the water cycle. So companies also constantly need to adjust. And it's also to point out that even if you're a company that's starting on their water journey, it's important to start. And you can really move towards continuous improvement. So then to the question of how did we select those tools and frameworks? So we applied 3 criteria that you can see displayed here on the slide. So one, framework, a tool needs to have been peer reviewed. I think that's quite self-explanatory. That it's actionable, really gives companies some information in terms of what to actually do with the information, and there's also a clear methodology. Okay, so then I will walk you through what's actually contained in the fan. So we'll take you through these 4 steps. We'll first cover assess. So in the assess tool, the main tools and frameworks that are contained in the fan are, on the one hand, we have some water footprint methodologies. So here we have the ISO methodology. Of course, many of you will be familiar with the ISO frameworks, but this is really a very robust scientific methodology to allow companies to assess their water-related impacts and dependencies across their entire value chain. There's also an alternative methodology on to measure water footprint that is proposed by the Water Footprint Network. Very much, again, complementary methodologies. And maybe just a note here that I didn't mention earlier, the FAN does not take position of which tool and framework to use over another. It's more about what's the type of context in which you might want to use a certain tool or framework. Next up, then we'd have the water risk assessment tool. So in this whole cycle, once a company will have assessed its impact and dependencies across the value chain, they would then be encouraged to assess their risks in those hotspot locations. So there are two fantastic tools that are out there. One is the WRI Aqueduct Water Risk Atlas, and then there's the WWF Water Risk Filter. The two are again very complementary, with the WWF Water Risk Filter having this complementary feature of being able to do operational water risk assessments at site level to find out how are companies actually encountering or experiencing water-related risks at their site, and what mitigation strategies do they already have in place. Finally, but also very importantly, the social aspect of water. So here we have the Wash Pledge self-assessment tool, which allows companies to assess their sites in terms of employee access to wash, including also surrounding communities. Assess has a number of tools, so we have a second page here as well. Again, here to highlight a very important framework, the Natural Capital Protocol, which allows companies to put a value on the natural capital that they depend on, both and also impact. Then a buzzword in today's world is the science-based targets for nature, which is being developed by SBTN. We've broken this down into, of course, as you may be aware, there are different steps across the Science-Based Targets for Nature framework. Here, in the assess step, it would be steps 1 and 2, which on the one hand allows you to define the most material impacts across your value chain, and then in a second step, prioritize. Maybe just, again, a quick note of explanation for those who may be less familiar. This is a framework that is currently being developed. Steps 1 and 2 has been launched quite recently. There's been an extensive stakeholder consultation process in developing this methodology, and we'll show you a little bit later what are the next steps on this. But just to note again that this is one methodology that companies can use, and it's probably more relevant for companies that have already a high level of knowledge across their value chain. Next up, the Smart Water Navigator, which is a site-level tool that allows you to put a value on your water risks and also set targets then accordingly. And then finally, the Wastewater Impact Assessment tool, which again is a very easy to use site-level tool that allows you to assess the impacts of your wastewater treatment across 3 indicators, including also GHG. So it really links in also with the climate agenda. Very easy to use, and I believe Una mentioned there was a session that you can rewatch from earlier this week in the conference. In the commit section, there aren't so many tools that were included in the FAN because there aren't so many tools that exist. One very important guidance is the setting enterprise water targets, which has been developed collaboratively by different organizations that you can see on the screen here, which is based on the concept and guidance around context-based water targets. Again, speaking to this aspect of, targets really need to be set where the hotspots lie, where action is needed the most. And then I mentioned the Science-Based Targets Network. So here we're on step 3. So this methodology will give information on how to set science-based targets for nature. So here in this case for freshwater in those priority locations. To note that this methodology is not yet final. It's currently being piloted with different companies and is currently being sort of tested in terms of its validity for companies, and adjustments are still being made to the methodology. We're going to move on now to transform. So again here to mention the Science-Based Targets for Nature framework. This is still very much in development, but there will be, as part of the framework, sort of a methodology around how to act and how to then also track that action. There's also the volumetric water benefit accounting methodology, which will allow you, so in places where water-related projects are in place, for example, to reduce runoff or to restore certain water-related ecosystems, to measure the volumetric impact of that, and then be able to sort of track and disclose the impact of that. And maybe here just to shout out that the water space is moving fast. There are new methodologies that are being developed. So here, there is also currently work underway to develop a parallel methodology and LinkedIn methodology to look at to develop a methodology for accounting of quality-related interventions, so water quality-related interventions. Finally, and very importantly, the Alliance for Water Stewardship standard. For those of you who are not familiar, this is a standard that has been developed through an extensive multi-stakeholder process about 10 years ago that allows companies to certify sites against sound water stewardship practice. It's a process. It's also an iterative process that allows companies to move towards continuous improvement, but really aims to drive collective action and stakeholder engagement in order to improve the broader health of the local water basin where a site is located. Finally, there's disclose. So, as we already mentioned earlier, this space is moving very fast, which is a good thing because, as we speak to this concept of accountability, there needs to be more accountability that is driven on water. So it's a very good thing when the right kind of information is asked. So here I'll walk you through also some main water-related disclosure frameworks that exist. Of course, very importantly, I don't think I'm providing new information here to anyone, is the CDP Water Security Questionnaire, very widely used by companies to report on how water has been integrated into decision-making, etc., water-related impacts and dependencies. Similarly, the GRI standards, so here the most relevant one is water and effluents, also quite widely used by companies to report on quite specific indicators around water use. And then the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, so SASB, Framework Application Guidance for Water-Related Disclosures. So SASB really looks at, okay, what are the financial impacts of sustainability-related matters? So here there's some specific questions that are being asked around, okay, how do these water-related impacts and dependencies actually affect my business financially? And here again, to note, I said the space is moving fast, and I think here there's also going to be there's a lot of sort of alignment and integration that is happening in the sustainability standards space. So there will likely be some changes here as well, and that's why the good thing about the FAN is that it'll be updated regularly. Finally, we have the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures and Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, TNFD and TCFD respectively. TCFD has already been launched some time ago. It's already been integrated into a national legislation in some countries, including in China, UK, and New Zealand and others, been adopted by the G7. TNFD is still under development. It's going to be launched, I believe, in the next few weeks or months. But also really with this perspective of actually looking at what impacts a company has on nature. But then also the reverse, what dependencies the companies has on nature. I believe this takes us to the end of the overview of the frameworks. And then I'll pass over to Lucie to walk us through a little bit the navigation tree and what it would conceptually look like when you open the FAN.
Thank you, Sarah, for presenting us all those frameworks. So a last word from us about the FAN and what it actually contains before we let our panelists come in and tell us about the experience about it. So what you see here on the screen is as a navigation tree, which Sarah briefly mentioned at the beginning of this presentation as the entry point of this guidance. Because again, to look back to the reasons that led us to develop this tool, if we remember, there's really this need for easy access and easy navigation. So we really realized, in addition to providing all the overviews we just presented you about all the frameworks, there's really the need for a company to understand where it stands on the water journey and then what tools it should prioritize according to the steps it wants to undertake. So this is why this navigation tree is there. So long story short, it was developed based on two main tools. One is the ACT-D framework, which we just went through together, and the other one would be the nature maturity assessment, also developed by WBCSD. So we combined those and adapted them to the water world in order to come up with that. So the navigation tree would consist in 3 steps that you see here on the screen. So the first question that a company should ask itself is, so what is my maturity level? Where do I stand on? And again, we're talking water-related journey here, not the whole sustainability framework. But so what is my maturity level on water? So there's going to be a few questions, 4 or 5. Again, the idea is that it's pretty straightforward, very easily actionable, so that it saves time and energy. And according to the answers of the questions, they will end up being classified into one of those 4 classifications that you see. So starting, developing, advancing, or leading. So that would be the first step. And then in the second step, the company would have to ask itself, okay, now that I know where I stand, what is it that I want to undertake? Am I at the assessing stage, or am I at the committing stage, or am I actually a bit in both? That could be possible, or even in the 4 stages. But basically, this will be more of a choice of the company depending on where they want to go. And let's say the company will discover it's at starting level and it wants to first assess its impact and dependencies and understand where it stands. Then by clicking through, it will take it to the third step, which is how do I actually get into action. So the third step would be the actual outcome of the navigation tree. So it's going to be composed of a few high-level recommendations, very generally speaking, related to water ambitions and to water actions that it can undertake, and also, most importantly, what actions should be prioritized in order to actually get to the next step. That's the first thing. The second would be a list of recommended frameworks that are included in the FAN, so that the company can easily quickly go through the FAN and directly go to the frameworks that actually are the most relevant to them at this stage. And finally, it's going to be group data requirements, so a quick list of the main data that is needed at this stage so that it can start preparing for it. And in terms of data, as discussed before, the high-level recommendation will contain these group data requirements, and then if you go into the frameworks, there's going to be more details about what actual data you need for using this framework in the best way. And you see the 3 dots because basically that's just a mock-up. The idea is that this is going to be replicated for every maturity level and every action step. I think I'll stop there, and I'll give the word to our panelists, which will share a bit more about about the experience and how we developed the FAN. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy and Sarah. So I'm inviting Kirsten, Martin, and Neha to the stage, please. And we'll start our panel discussion with some structured questions before we turn to the audience. All right, So first question to Martin. What made you interested to take part in the development of the FAN?
Yeah, so thanks, Una, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel, and also for reaching out to me and to Tetra Pak in the startup of this work. So the reason was quite personal, actually. I needed to learn a lot more about a lot of these frameworks and tools. Taking a new role in Tetra Pak, and also Tetra Pak taking let's say, advancing our journey on water stewardship, it was really felt that we need to be part of networks and exchanging ideas. So that was really came as a free opportunity to me then at a very convenient time. So that was the first reason. Also, I would say, as probably many companies, if you're not very advanced already and you've set and you've decided on all your frameworks to use, it's very daunting to see all these frameworks and that they come in different shapes and formats, and they have perhaps different ways to be applied and outcomes. So just to get a way to understand them more, to kind of briefly go through them, to see how they work, how they interconnect, or what benefits and challenges they may bring. So getting a kind of a map out of that landscape was felt to be really important for myself and for Tetra Pak, to see how they overlap or integrate and so on. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Martin. And Neha, maybe you can build up on that. How do you see the fan helping you in your job and your business on your water journey?
Thank you, Una, for inviting and having this opportunity to work together with you and everybody else. I would like to share that we have been at InterIKEA Group on our journey to set our water stewardship journey. And building on to what Martin said, it has been very scary. It has been, confusing to figure out, what tools and methodologies to use in order to support, build our strategy. And more effort was actually going in finding that information than to be able to, work over it. So with that as the background, and when this opportunity came, when you brought it up and when we discussed with other companies that, this is a common problem and the opportunity came, it was quite interesting. And the best part over the discussions that we have liked, which was already shared also, is the navigation tree, because with so many tools out, it's very difficult to find that which is more suitable to me and my needs, depending on, because companies differ from each other, some want to focus on their operations, some want to focus on, value chain perspective, depending on the materiality. So I believe that this navigation tree is going to be really, really helpful for us in order to figure out, what is my starting point, as well as where is my wish position, depending on my, established company strategy, figuring it out in relation to our scope, which I mentioned, operations or value chain, in relation to understanding of our impact and dependencies, which is, one or more water risk categories. We want to focus on, only on water quantity or including wash or water quality, how do we go about it, as well as in terms of our data readiness. Yeah. So that I feel is going to be one big benefit to everybody using FAN.
Thank you so much, Neha. And Kirsten, turning over to you. So Sarah and Lucy already mentioned the importance of building the business case internally in order to mobilize resources for more ambition action on water and nature. And it also offers some links to supporting material within the FAN. Maybe you could provide some insight into why this element is so important and which tool series in particular has developed to support companies with this.
Yes, well, thank you first for having me here today. And we were very pleased to see that the business case was really core to the FAN. I think that really is critical. But first, for those of you who are not as familiar with Ceres, we're a sustainability NGO working with companies and investors on a variety of sustainability challenges, including water resources. And much of our work really is centered around this concept of water risk. And this is probably a term that many of you in the room are familiar with, but just to really hone in on what this means, there is a financial risk associated with not mitigating different water issues. So whether it's not having enough water for your product, whether it's not having a high enough water quality for fit to purpose, whether it's social license to operate in a community, and the list goes on. There's a lot of risks associated with water impacts. So, we've seen a lot of inroads and a lot of the private sector and investors starting to understand that there are, in fact, these risks and working to mitigate those. But we aren't seeing that the pace and uptake of this is quick enough. So that's really where, the business case comes into this, and really furthering out, what is that financial case for action. If you think about it, a sustainability officer can, put forward a great plan and set great commitments, but at the end of the day, if you don't have that internal buy-in and make that case of why this is important to the business, it's hard to get those dollars to actually fund those actions. So, in order to really help support, businesses and investors in really thinking about the business case and building this out, Ceres partnered with a consultancy, Blue Risk, to really think about how we could support and develop tools and frameworks to really get at this. And so I'm very pleased that the two tools that I'll get to touch on today are reflected in the fan as well. They're also up on our website, so I encourage you in the meantime, even before the fan is released, to check them out. But first, we set off to really think about the double materiality lens. And, there's been a lot of work and discussion on sort of the dependencies of water resources to the business and, what the risks could be if those resources were no longer available. But we wanted to look at the flip side. What is the financial value at risk if you don't address those impacts to water resources? And so really looking at sort of that double materiality lens. So we worked with Blue Risk and actually one of our investor partners, DWS, and then also S&P Global, and really dove into some of their data sets to really understand specifically in the apparel sector and the meat sector, what are those water-related externalities that are being generated from their business as usual? What is the cost of addressing these externalities? And then what is the impact on the valuation of the company? So this research and this methodology really hit home that companies are not passive actors in the water crisis, and that their operations are in fact creating this additional risk. And when they are addressing this risk, that has a hefty price tag and needs to be considered in business planning and for the long term. In fact, one of the apparel companies we looked at had a valuation of negative 47% due to these externalities. So it is a big risk. But we hope that this first tool, these sets of materiality briefs and the methodology that is open source can help companies start to think about this double materiality and what that really means for the business, and then make the business case. And then really quickly, the second piece of research that actually we just released a couple weeks ago, so hot off the presses, really builds on this work. And with the powerful research we have in hand from those materiality briefs that I just mentioned, we wanted to not only account for the cost of addressing the externalities, but also the benefits of doing so. And, I've heard a couple sessions here at World Water Week of how it's so important to speak in terms that resonate with CFOs and procurement teams and what have you. So what we did is we built out, again, with our partners Blue Risk, a cost-benefit analysis framework where businesses can really pencil out what the return on investment and, importantly, also the societal return on investment is from implementing water interventions in certain parts of the value chain. And importantly, with this work, we really wanted to make sure that we were looking at the benefits through the lens of the full value of water. So not just the cost of water, that's not going to really get at this, or, the shadow price of water, that's a better start. It gives a risk multiplier, but that's not really it as well. But this methodology really contemplates the full value of water, meaning, things like the value that water delivers to ensuring a secure supply chain or ensuring the license to operate in a community. So this framework importantly sort of contemplates that full value. And so again, this is open source on our website. We hope that it can be really helpful as a tool in supporting businesses on their journey as they're really developing this internal business case and helping make the case for action.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. That's a very comprehensive answer, and definitely encourage you to check out those tools. And like we said, we've tried to integrate them within the business case section of the FAN. So there's a lot of data to collect, I guess, to do that. So we often hear from companies, we cannot act on water because we don't have the sufficient data, or we're waiting for the perfect data. We're worried with what the data we have. What's your take on this, and how do you think the FAN can help assist on this?
Very relevant point, Una. I think this is one of the common problems that we discuss among others. Internally, we have been having this issue because, as we mentioned, that there are so many tools and methodologies, and every tool and method refers to a different set of data, requirement, references, but it's not very clear at most of the times that Do we have it? Can we start it? And what is the starting point? And internally, I think every company wants to have certain data point to start to make the right decisions from a strategy point of view, which are substantiated by data. But it's just becoming, at times a paralysis situation, so those have been the kind of problems coming up. But in reference to FAN, I think a good discussion based on the group discussions, feedback, and you listening and understanding our problems and integrating it within the FAN. One key pointers that we had given feedback and we see coming up in the tool is, for each step of, starting, developing, advancing, and leading, the 4 stages of maturity. And under each assess, commit, and transform, there have been a reference identified of what is the data readiness.
Minimum
right?
data.
Minimum data readiness. I think that is very, very good for any company while going through the navigation tree, as well as identifying, okay, where we are. There's a clarity in terms of minimum data readiness that gives confidence to a company that, okay, yeah, if this is the kind of data readiness, then what is the right tool or methodology for me? Or if I wish to choose a certain methodology, in the next stage of, advancing or leading, then what is the minimum data requirement that is going to be? So having it in a comparable manner, I think, would be very, very good, and I look forward to it being released so that we can start using it.
Yeah, it's a very structured way of presenting the minimum data requirements for the different tools.
Yeah.
And like you say, it gives confidence actually to the companies to get started, because we said you can get started with these minimum.
Yes,
No
that
need
is
to
very,
wait.
very important, yes. We should not hold our actions because of, because of the fear that we are not ready. So with whatever data we are ready, there are still possibilities of taking small actions or calculative actions that gives confidence that we are moving in the right direction, at least.
And through taking action in the beginning, in the little steps, you build up confidence to then move on to the next step.
Next step.
Yeah. Great, thanks. And Martin, over to you. So we appreciate that the FAN is not launched, as there's nothing for you to see yet, but kind of looking into the future and theoretically speaking, how do you see yourself making use of it in your current role?
Yeah, so I mean, a company will make certain decisions to go down or to apply certain tools, right? So, I think we are not at at the very zero level. So we've done already some, of course, commitments or kind of decisions to go for certain frameworks or to apply certain methodologies. I don't think the FAN maybe will then, of course, reverse everything and pull it all back and start over, which I'm guessing is not the intention either. But so you're going to be, of course, and companies are in different stages or are using different methodologies. So you're going to start, of course, in very different places, but it's of course, at least for Tetra Pak, we're not in a super advanced. We're not in the leading. I would not assess ourselves to be in the leading part. So there are definitely parts for us to continue to develop on, and data sets, like you say, Neha, to kind of expand and to improve. So I think the way for us to use the FAN once it gets launched is really to when we know our gaps, be it wash maybe that we feel that we need to work more on, we zoom in on that section of the FAN and we go to that, based on our maturity level and the ACT-D framework, we go to the navigation tree, we find, this is kind of tools you can use in the different stages for wash. So I think it will be very useful for us to zoom in quicker than making a very, let's say, clean sheet kind of start of, mapping it all by ourselves. Yeah. So that's very much what I'm looking forward to. I'd also like to point out, I think the document itself with the list, I mean, I think last time I looked, it was 62 pages in the Word format that we're currently developing. So it's becoming comprehensive, of course, but I think it's a good library or a reference as well, which I think can be used internally in Tetra Pak to build capacity for water knowledge. I know our sales teams struggle sometimes to keep up to date or to keep the conversation going with the customer. That may be, and of course we have thousands of customers. They may all have different frameworks that they've decided to go for. So a salesperson may need one day to know about the SBTN approach that a customer has chosen. Another one maybe have gone for the TCFD or others approaches. So I think it's useful to have that as a it's not something I, as a water lead in Tetra Pak, need to develop myself and then hand over. I can just simply take this, give it to the salespeople or the supplier management people speaking to suppliers, etc. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Martin. And yeah, it's great what you said. You may not be a leading company, but even if you are a leading company, I think this is a good tool to also use as a sense check to just make sure that you have considered all the tools and frameworks that exist. And obviously it helps you with once all these things are have different versioning or updated. This is a quick way to kind of, again, go there and get the information quicker. So yeah, and like you say, you can engage whatever stage you are, where it's starting to leading. There's different entry points that you can engage with the tool. So yeah, great, thanks. And Kirsten, over to you. So the FAN seeks to support companies in their journey to better manage water resources and mitigate water risks. Can you maybe talk a bit about the work Siri has done exploring the systematic nature of risks associated with poorly managed water resources, and maybe some frameworks you've developed around that? Please.
Yeah, definitely. So there's two pieces of research and frameworks that I think really speak to the systemic nature of water risks and sort of getting at, building out the business case from there. So, what really drove some of this work, just to sort of set the stage, is that, in working with the private sector and some of the investors that we work with, we often got the comments, oh, well, water is a local issue. It's an issue maybe at that facility in that country, but, we don't have to think about it more broadly in our portfolio because it's that one issue. And so we really, at Ceres, of course, knew that that wasn't the case, but we wanted to set out to really draw from the science to debunk this way of thinking and really give the private sector the resources and the tools and the justifications that this is in fact a systemic risk and that we need to act more concertedly to address it. So we partnered with the Global Institute of Water Security, an academic institution, about a dozen academics from around the globe, to really help inform building the scientific case of, what are those private sector impacts on water resources? What are the specific impacts that are being created? What practices are creating those impacts? What geographies are we seeing this? And so the scientists really drew from decades of research to really build a comprehensive picture that I think is really helpful for the private sector and for investors to really get a handle on the systemic nature of these risks and where those risks really lie. So we published this piece of work. It's referenced in the FAN. It's called the Global Assessment of Private Sector Impacts on Water, and it's also available on our website. And it really, I think, makes the case and helps for investors in the private sector to really demonstrate that these are systemic issues that they need to address. And also, importantly, I think it has a lot of good information to place focus. Where within the value chain should we be focusing? What impacts should we really be prioritizing? And so I think it's a really helpful resource. And then stemming from that, the second piece of research and a framework I'd like to share is, we also heard a lot from the private sector and the investor community in particular that, okay, so it is a systemic risk. As we start to engage and have conversations with the companies within our portfolio, what do we ask them to do? Like, on the climate side, which Ceres has worked for quite some time, you can talk about aligning with the Paris Agreement or trying to achieve a 1.5 degrees scenario. But for water, we didn't really see that. So we drew from that scientific research and co-developed with the investor partners a set of 6 corporate expectations for valuing water. And these set of 6 expectations are in the realms of water availability, water quality, ecosystem protection, WASH, governance and board oversight, and public policy. And so, this really sets a framework for what the investors are expecting that the companies address and move forward with and really mitigate their risk. And so in October, we'll be releasing an analysis that looks at a group of 72 companies and sees where they are on their journey with those 6 corporate expectations for valuing water. It has a number of KPIs, that the investors are looking at. So I think not only is that an important resource for the investors, but also the private sector to see, okay, where are the gaps? Where do we need to work? And then I think that goes back very nicely to the fan and sort of, okay, this is where we are on the journey. This is where we need to go. And these are the tools that we can bring to the table to move this forward in the positive direction.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kirsten, and thank you for bringing in this investor element and how they could, their part and how they could use the fan with their investment opportunities. So thank you very much. That concludes our panel discussion. I hope that's been advantageous to understand more about the fan and how it might be used by the private sector. And now we'll move to the Q&A part of the session. So I'd like to invite Sarah and Lucy to the stage to join us. And so... Sorry. Oh. Yep. So, of course, you may have lots of questions for us, so please do fire away. There'll be a microphone passing around. And Ariane, if there's anything from the online audience, do let us know. And we also have a few questions if you'd like to consider for your business, and that's on there. So how can we make sure to maximize the impact within the company? What else would you need to make sure that water is treated as a strategic business issue? And what else is needed to drive greater accountability on water? So if you are inclined to consider these and share your thoughts, we very much welcome that. Otherwise, there's a mic going around. Oh, there's one there.
Hi there. Good morning. My name's Emily Faint from the British Standards Institution. Thank you for a really, really useful presentation this morning. I have lots of notes and lots of questions. My main question, though, to Sarah and Lucy on the mapping research done to inform the FAN tool is in the way that you set it out according to the ACT-D framework, did you find that there were certain stages of the journey where there is sort of overwhelming number of tools and guidance and some where you thought there weren't any at all or an insufficient number? Are there parts of the journey where no standards, no guidance, no tools even exist in the first place and you see a need to create a new one?
Thanks very much, Emily, for that question. I think it's an extremely relevant one. I think the slides you saw kind of speak for themselves. We had 2 slides on assess and only 1 slide on the other steps. I do believe, based on what we've seen and based on our experience in the water stewardship space, there's not a lot of beef yet in terms of on the commit stage and on the transform stage. In particularly on the transform stage, we have, of course, as you mentioned, we have the AWS standard. We have some other tools and frameworks that allow you to assess what to do once you've acted or how to assess that. But indeed, that's where things are currently lacking. So in principle, also I think there's ideally all companies across the world would, for example, use the AWS standard to certify all their sites, but that's unfortunately we're still quite far away from that reality. So really seeing, okay, well, are there what's the guidance for that in between stage when companies aren't ready to, or are just aren't at that stage yet at really driving action across all of their sites. So definitely those two stages are ones where guidance is a little bit lacking. Yeah.
Hi there. This is Ruth Loftus from Diageo. Thanks very much. Great presentation, really informative. Quick question on supply chain specifically. So a lot of the assess phase, what would the team recommend in terms of understanding impacts and accountability for your supply chain? Because lots of the tools are relevant for site, but not as relevant for supply chain. It'd be great to get some views on that.
I'll get started again, and I don't want to monopolize the mic. So in principle, the approach is that companies assess their water-related impacts and dependencies across their entire value chain. So indeed, there are, as you've rightly pointed out, there are some tools that will only allow you to sort of do that at a site level, or then maybe broaden that out at least to operations. And then indeed others that have a broader scope. I think in principle the approach also should be that we need to act where it's needed, where it matters the most. At the same time, companies, of course, have direct control over their operations. So it doesn't mean if you have a low water-related impact and dependency within your own operations that you shouldn't do anything. It's still within your direct sphere of influence, so that's where you should act. So that's a little bit, so there is, I think there is that complementarity between these different tools. Some really hone in at a site level, because we also want to understand, well, some of the audience of this tool might be, of this guidance, might be site managers. So then we can say, okay, well, these are the tools for you. And then for corporate level, there are tools that really allow you to look at the entire value chain. I hope that answered your question. I see you nod, okay. I don't know if anyone would like to add to that. Okay.
Thank you for the question. Any more questions? We've got 30 minutes left. Anything from online, Ariane?
Sorry, can I just build then on that question? I guess specifically the question of how would you recommend, and I guess to the companies on the panel as well, and maybe series as well, how would you recommend trying to aggregate your impacts across your supply chain? I mean, that's what we're all trying to do, but it's incredibly complicated. So, Sarah, I appreciate the answer, and it's a really, I guess it's a tricky question. But maybe just probing a bit more, how do we try and aggregate the actual impacts across the supply chain, and should we or shouldn't we? Maybe we shouldn't be trying to aggregate the impacts and understand exactly where they are.
I'll give some comments, maybe not an answer, but some comments. So we did a value chain assessment of impacts and risks last year, and of course looking at the suppliers, and thousands of suppliers. Of course we can prioritize them in terms of their importance and materiality to us, so we filter away some of them. But and then each supplier of course has a number of sites, so it quickly, as we all know, becomes a huge number. And I think I get your question that, okay, so one supplier, 15 sites maybe, each of their sites, of course, has one particular risk. And how do we aggregate and how do we assess that supplier in terms of our relationship with them? Are we promoting them for good water practices, or are we challenging them to do more based on their impact and based on having maybe 5 sites that are really water stressed and maybe not do as much as they should, and maybe have some other sites. So joining it up, I think I can just also see the challenge there, and how to of course recognizing that water is contextual, and you got to be at the site, but still at a company in a, let's say, pragmatic way to assess your suppliers in a reasonable way for our supplier managers working with the vast range of suppliers. It's not going to be feasible to be sitting there with a map filled with thousands of dots of supplier sites and making something useful come out of that. So maybe not an answer, but some maybe echoing to your question and challenge. I don't know, Neha, you have a huge supply chain as well, yes. and maybe more experience and an approach that you want to share.
No, we are all also exploring, so I'll just add on, maybe a comment, not an answer. So I understand where you're coming from. Going backward into the value chain is where, in a way, we want to understand our impact and dependency, but then there are definite limitations because a lot of these tools require much more granular information than what we have available as of today. So I look at it as a two-prong approach. One, an intention to explore, not forget that that is a wish. We want to go ahead because we understand that, that is important, and we want to increase our understanding as well as, knowledge of impacts and dependencies in our value chain. But at the same time, not be limited by, not availability of granular data. So let's start with what we already have. Right from, within our textile value chain, I would say that we understand, going backward into our value chain, cotton is one of a very important material for us. So we started working on cotton much before we had any type of data in terms of what percentage contribution it is in our value chain, right? But we understood that, okay, cotton is an important material. So, from an industry mapping perspective, we have idea, okay, that these are the key raw materials, within our food value chain. Palm oil is there, palm is there, soy is there, understanding that. So it is the key commodities or raw materials we understand from an industry perspective of broader view, secondary data sources that, these are important areas of concern. And let's start, where we can find out more information. There are opportunities to do collective action with others, find out more information on where we are, where there's a ability to work, right? And at the same time, the intent to build more data and information is also there that will increase our understanding of our impact and dependency. Yeah. So both approaches at the same time to explore till the time we have better information as well as better tools supporting us. Yeah.
Just to emphasize a few of those points, I think this reminds me of a conversation I had actually last year at last World Water Week, and I was speaking with a company who I think Ceres would consider quite leading edge in their water journey, and they were just finishing sort of a more comprehensive mapping of their supply chain, and this is, a much more advanced company. So I think, it goes to your point, Neha, we can't wait to get the perfect data, and so we have to proceed with what we have and concurrently have an ambition of getting that full mapping so that we can get to that granularity. But I think, we have to start and move the actions, and I know there's a lot of great opportunities, in identified high-risk basins where there is a lot of, supply chain activity aggregated. The WRC, out of the CEO Water Mandate, for example, has identified 100 basins, and if we can start progress in those high-risk areas and then over time, get that granularity in the data and then really hone in on additional basins that may need help. I think, that's the sort of trajectory I see as really moving the dial forward.
Mm-hmm. And maybe then just to close, to tie it back to the FAN and the tools and frameworks. So indeed, from a corporate perspective, the word of the day is really prioritize. That's where the new tools and frameworks that are being developed, that's the direction that they're pointing towards, is really to look at the entire value chain, but really to prioritize in those hotspots. So typically, that's the approach that SBTN sets out to do. So we've at Quantis we've been instrumental in developing the methodology and pilot testing the methodology with companies. And indeed, there have been numerous experiences where data wasn't there. We had to use proxies, and then it also sends a signal internally. Okay, well, here we might want to explore or push for more visibility. But really, then indeed, and then once those hotspots are identified, to then map that with existing initiatives, WRC, the AWS Impact Accelerators, and others that can then drive collective action.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Don't be shy. Small group. One online, yes.
Reporting from the online chat, there's a very dynamic discussion on how to find secondary data for semiconductor water footprinting. So it's great to see that this session is bringing people together and that they can get support. There's another question, which I believe echoes something that you, Martin, said about how the fan can be used in other functions that are not sustainability in your company. And the question is, do you see the fan possibly being a useful resource in raising awareness and engagement with suppliers?
Yeah, I think again, with the number of suppliers a company has, the number of frameworks, that matrix is something we need to manage in our discussions with in the value chain, upstream and downstream. So I think the fan will be very useful for teams working with the suppliers to be able to understand and speak in the same language or speak with the same framework understanding as the suppliers. So that can be again used as a tool or as a capacity building for those teams having to have those discussions. Also, I think I could use this opportunity to say that assessment of suppliers. We were talking a little bit about it before, perhaps, and the risks, but also the simple supplier assessments. Companies do it all the time of making sure that we have the right suppliers, that they're keeping on their toes and improving both in terms of quality of the products they sell to us, but also the way they operate. So I think this can be the fan and the navigation tree can be used then as a way to encourage suppliers if they are not maybe in a already a water advanced state. They need to start, and we as a customer to them can make expectations or encourage them to use then the navigation tree to understand, of course, as the methodology goes, understand first their maturity. Then once they know that, and we know how our suppliers are variously mature, they can then get guidance and get working. So I think this is a very good way for us to engage and raise the awareness with suppliers in a way that we don't have to come up with very much of ourselves. We can point them in a direction and they can then themselves pick up from there. Yeah.
I think maybe if I can just build up on this, I think what you just said, Martin, is really relevant, and maybe just coming back to this navigation tree point, I think, as explained before, the navigation tree is initially built as a very easy exercise for company to quickly answer and then be able to use the fan, but there will be a few key questions in it, typically like related to the type of water-related action that a company or a site accomplishes, if there's any external communication that is made, if there's any water-related ambitions. So again, this can be either answered pretty quickly in order to then quickly get into the fan, or as you just mentioned, I think typically for suppliers, it could be used as an assessment exercise and as a mapping exercise. If you really decide, if you give it to your suppliers and you could ask them to actually spend a bit of time on it, and they could sit and really map it would be an occasion for them to map their water-related actions and use the 4 or 5 key questions that will be asked in this navigation tree as an early assessment, pre-assessment stage, maybe even before getting in the assess phase. Again, those questions will be asked in the idea is that it's a simple vocabulary, very straightforward, very pragmatical and operationalized. So I guess that's I think you made a very good point. I just wanted to elaborate a bit on that because I'm aware you haven't actually seen the questions that will be in this navigation tree, but that could maybe, it's not, again, we're not creating a new tool, but this navigation tree within the guidance could actually be a smart and quick tool to use to do this supplier assessment, if that can help.
I just want to build on what you just said, which is just that generally, and again, I think this will probably resonate with quite some companies that are here and online today, is that education and awareness raising is so important. So for example, so at Quantis, we will work with companies that are really starting on their water journey and with those who are leading. But in both cases, actually, very often, sites or suppliers, there's there's not always an understanding of what water risks look like. So you could have a site that is frequently, multiple times a year, experiencing factory shutdowns because the municipal water supply is not reliable. They have to truck in water tanks. And they just accept it as a reality because that's the reality that they know. And so it's also really this education and awareness piece of the puzzle to actually encourage people to ask themselves those questions. Well, actually, this doesn't have to be my reality. It could be different. So I think that's where, again, this piece around education and awareness, it's so important. And I think that's already, if we get just that right, we can already drive a lot of the impact. And I just wanted to clarify something that I said to Emily from BSI earlier to your question, because so around the tools and frameworks across the ACT-D framework and where there are more and less frameworks. I don't want to send a message that everyone should go out there now and develop more tools and frameworks, because all the tools and frameworks that are needed broadly are already there. They need to be used more. And so that's, I think I just wanted to make sure that I sort of put a bit of a clarification on that, because it's, I think we can all agree that what is desperately needed is more action. Here we're providing some clarification on how to operationalize that action, but there's not necessarily a need for more tools and frameworks. I think there's some very important and positive developments going on, but please use the tools and frameworks that exist.
Thank you, everyone. Any more questions? Yeah, thank you.
Hi. Sorry, I wasn't able to join the full session, so you might have heard this. We've been doing a great session, but over the years we've been looking at the science of accountability for water, and it's been conceptualized as a cycle.
Sorry, Nick, I think the online people can't hear you, so could we just pass a mic down to Nick, please?
So we conceptualized an accountability cycle, which is about reporting against norms and expectations and disclosing that. But a key part of it is a sanction or a reward to respond to the level of accountability. And it's a really important step. Without that, it's not really an accountability mechanism. Have you explored the tools or approaches to sanctions and rewards in this context? Have you been able to consider that? In terms of, and the question is, are they powerful enough to drive and incentivize corporate action on the ground?
Okay. All right. Thanks very much for the question, Nick. I think you raise a very important point that this work, and we're here in this room, we're one piece of the puzzle, right? There are systemic forces that are outside of what we're trying to do here that need to also play their part in order to really drive more action on water. And so I will allow myself to speak on behalf of WBCSD, because we had, when we started first these conversations around developing this piece of work, they really came to us with this wish, okay, so there is a dire lack of accountability on water. What can we do as sort of business community to contribute to that? So you'll see in December when it's launched that the way we framed it really is that, so this accountability system is lacking, and here's our piece of the puzzle. And then to bring it full circle, so in terms of the tools and frameworks that you mentioned, incentives, but then also the rewards, and also then I guess the flip side of that, punishments, fines, etc. So for me, that would come in the form of legal frameworks, regulatory frameworks. We make a call out to relevant regulatory frameworks, but they're also very specific to countries. So the FAN is not built to have a repository of all relevant local or national, international legislations. But of course, that's a really important piece of the puzzle. And I think here, I mean, there's also very important work going on in driving that accountability through the Fair Water Footprint Initiative, for example. So it is also an important piece of the puzzle. And I think we're here, to sort of to make an effort with regards to actually just providing already a bit of clarity. Okay, what should companies do? And then, indeed, there also needs to be other forces that really actually then ask the right questions. Okay, have you done what you've set out to do, etc. So yeah, I hope that answered your questions.
Great. Thank you for your question. Thanks, Sarah. Any more questions? No. All right. Should we wrap up? No. Thank you so much to the panel. And I'll just give a few closing summaries. So again, we've repeated this many times, but the FAN will be launching in December of this year. It's not a new framework, not a new standard. It's just a summary of existing frameworks and toolkits. It will be a living document, so we want to make sure that the information is up to date, and we really look to the owners of these to update it, since it is driving traffic to their site and essentially free marketing for the materials. Again, we've heard a lot on data. Do not wait for the perfect data to get started. And when the FAN, it breaks it down to the minimum and grouped minimum data requirements. And our call to action, as Sarah just said, once it's launched, we want as many companies to be using it, regardless where they are on their water journey, regardless if they're starting to leading or if they want to start with assess or commit or transform and to disclose. Because we are here at this conference because we all know we are behind on addressing the water crisis and building resilience. And getting started with the FAN is one way to address that. And then again, that's all from us today. And thank you very much to Kirsten, Martin, Lucy, Neha, Sarah, and Ariane, and thank you all for joining online and in this room and dedicating your time and expertise and sharing your experiences and knowledge. Enjoy the rest of your day and safe travels. Thank you very much for listening.